Hi, welcome to my annual update to my record collection. This year is 2020. I'm 1.5 years into collecting. I started this annual tradition last year, 6 months into collecting, and now I've amassed over 90 records, and I'm excited to show off the new ones that I've acquired in these last 12 months. So, starting from alphabetical order, I have Amen Dunes' Freedom, a brilliant 2018 record front to back. It's not extremely well known, but it's a brilliant indie pop, indie rock record that I enjoy a lot. Following that, I have Arctic Monkeys, Whatever People Say I Am, That's What I'm Not. And that was one of the first records I really fell in love with, and the band itself was a band I really loved around the age of 14. I find with a lot of music fans nowadays, Arctic Monkeys was a stepping stone for them and a record that they cherished in their mid-teens. And that album is certainly not an album I listen to much anymore, but I needed to have it in my collection just for the sentimentality of it. Similarly, I have AM from Arctic Monkeys, the 2013 record. Both those albums are amongst my favorite albums, just in terms of what they mean to me, but I don't listen to them much anymore. To add to my Animal Collective albums, I have Strawberry Jam, their 2007 record, and it's a brilliant album, front to back. Certainly more poppy than the stuff previous, but I enjoy it very much nonetheless. And following that, I have Fall Be Kind EP, the 2009 EP released after their brilliant and famous Merriweather Post Pavilion record, and it's a fantastic collection of 5 songs in a slightly different style to the electro pop and glitch pop sounds that they were embracing on Strawberry Jam and Merriweather Post Pavilion. Following that, I have Belle and Sebastian's If You're Feeling Sinister, their sophomore album released in 1996, and it's a fantastic set of indie pop tracks that I truly love. You know, on a cold winter's day, that stuff will warm you up. Following that, I have George Ben's Africa Brazil. It's a Vinyl Me Please release that I picked up. Following that, I have Big Thief's Two Hands, their second record released in the year of 2019 after their brilliant UFOF. And Two Hands was recorded in a different style to UFOF despite both of those records being released in the same year. Two Hands is a lot more raw and less touched up, but I appreciate that aspect of it. Speaking of raw, I have Danny Brown's Atrocity Exhibition, one of my favorite rap records. Quite a harrowing and disturbing listen, but also extremely enjoyable and rewarding at the same time. Following that, I have Miles Davis's Kind of Blue. This is just a 2015 repress, but it sounds fantastic, and it's certainly one of my favorite jazz albums, and it's probably considered by most to be one of the best, if not the best, jazz album there is. I also have Miles in Tokyo, Miles Davis's live album, released originally only in Japan, but they did a 2019 Record Store Day release, which I didn't unfortunately pick up. So instead I got this 2020 version in red vinyl, and it does sound great, and with, you know, the MC introducing all the band members and the set list they played and the crowd sound that get involved, it really gives you a nice live experience. Following that, moving into rock, I have Deerhunter's Microcastle and Weird Al Raconte. So these were 2 albums released in close proximity to each other, and Weird Al Raconte was recorded and released after Microcastle was leaked early, and Deerhunter wanted to reward those who waited patiently for the legitimate release of Microcastle. Following that, I have The Doors' self-titled debut, one of my favorite records from them, a band I was put onto by my dad. You know, one of those albums that you're played constantly when you're younger, and I've just carried that sound with me. And this is one of my favorite Doors albums that I've been waiting for a long time to pick up, and I found a great secondhand copy on eBay. Although the disc itself is mismatching with the cover, they're two different editions, which is odd. The cover is a 1973 German pressing, whereas the disc is a 71 UK pressing. And following that, I also have the Doors' Soft Parade, which is their fourth album, I believe. Perhaps considered to be their worst, but it's one of my favorite albums of theirs. I certainly think it's underrated, and I enjoy the more poppy side where they depart a bit more from their signature psychedelic rock and blues rock sounds. Following that, I've Brian Eno's Another Green World, a classic album which introduces Eno's ambient side. And then I have another Eno album, Ambient 2, which was a collaboration with Harold Budd, an experimental pianist, and it might be my favorite ambient record from Eno himself. It's brilliant, especially the intro track with extremely atmospheric and gentle piano keys, and the rest of the track list is fantastic as well. Next I have FKA Twigs' Magdalene, one of the albums that I acquired last year, quite soon after it was released, and I did fall in love with the album quickly after I first listened to it. And it's not one that I admit I've returned to all that much since the months after its release, but it's certainly one that I still enjoy a lot. But it's just such a dark and depressing album that you really have to, you know, take some time to listen to and, you know, make way for the album, because it's going to unsettle you. And then I have Fleet Foxes' Helplessness Blues, a brilliant double album I was put onto by a friend. Also a Fleet Foxes release, I have Crack Up, their third album and most recent album. It's an album I didn't enjoy all that much initially, but it's one that I've grown to love. It's still probably my third favorite out of their 3 releases so far, but I have it in my collection. Following that, I have Getz and Gilberto Jazz and Samba album and Bossa Nova. It's a brilliant album with the iconic song Girl from Ipanema, but the rest of the tracks are fantastic as well. Super gentle and smooth, and it's one of those that you can put by a fireplace and just nod off to. I also have the album Phantom Rhythm by Gong Gong Gong. The band is based in Beijing, but features a Cantonese lead singer. Next I have DFA remix of Dare, the song by the Gorillaz off their album Demon Days. And the song itself is fantastic, but this is a remix by James Murphy's label DFA. James Murphy is of course of LCD Sound System. Next I have Grizzly Bear's Yellow House, their sophomore album. So this one is a 45 RPM issue, limited to 1,000 copies, including a CD, and it sounds absolutely fantastic, as you can imagine. I'm so glad I have this record, as it's also one of my favorite records. From the same band, I have Shields. So this is their 2012 release, and it was my first exposure to the band, and it's an album that I loved from the start and I still enjoy a lot and play quite occasionally. Next I have Helado Negros, This Is How You Smile, his latest release, one of my favorite albums of 2019. It's a beautiful bedroom pop, indie pop album with fantastic songs sung in both English and Spanish. I truly love this album, and I did luckily get a chance to see Helado Negro live, which is what inspired me to get this album. This is the live version recorded in a studio. It's one of my best sounding albums. I'm really glad I have it in my collection. Following that, I have a compilation album of Howlin' Wolf, with classics of his like Smokestack Lightning. I have it in my collection just to add a bit of variance. Following that, I have the Kendrick Lamar album Untitled Unmastered. It's a brilliant collection of tracks recorded in the same sessions as To Pimp a Butterfly. These set of 8 songs are brilliant, a lot more raw and unfinished as the title suggests, but enjoyable nonetheless. Following that, I have Kendrick Lamar's latest 2017 release, Damn. Came out to universal acclaim from most, but some consider it to be the weakest of his 3 big albums, namely this one, To Pimp a Butterfly, and Good Kid, Mad City. I would put it third amongst those, but nonetheless, he's one of my favorite artists, and this album has grown on me more and more throughout the years, and so I'm really glad to have it in my collection. I mentioned DFA earlier, and I do have an LCD sound system release. This is happening with a fantastic collection of dance punk tracks that are simply brilliant. This album's a masterpiece in of itself. And the song I Can Change featured on a FIFA 10 soundtrack, I believe, which is a game I played when I was young, and that song is very nostalgic to me as a result. Following that, I have the Microphones Glow Part 2, a highly revered lo-fi indie folk album by the genius that is Phil Elverum. And I acquired this record in a Beijing record store with my friend in mind who I knew liked the album. But I looked up online at the value of the album and realized that it's quite a rare pressing and it's worth quite a bit. And for the price it was being sold at, I thought it'd be a great bargain to buy. Selfishly, I kept the album for myself, but since then I listened to the album and truly loved it. So I am really glad that I did keep it on. It's a brilliant foray into, early 2000s lo-fi music, and Phil Elverum has a fantastic discography, but this is certainly one of its standouts. Next, I have Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds, The Boatman's Call. His 1997 release, released after 2 fantastic albums, Let Love In and Murder Ballads. Having listened to Skeleton Tree, released in 2016, and Ghosteen, 2019's release, I decided to embark on a deep dive into Nick Cave's discography. And The Boatman Call was an album that was available at my university's music library. I was able to borrow it, I listened to it and loved it. And that then inspired me to listen to all the Bad Seeds' albums. But this album remains my favorite of the bunch, and thus I have it on vinyl. Speaking of Nick Cave, I have his 2019 release Ghosteen, which is truly beautiful. And the first album fully recorded after the death of Nick Cave's son. And as opposed to Skeleton Tree, while both albums feature extremely dark themes and lyrics and some sounds, I find that this album is more uplifting or a bit less depressing because of the fact that a lot of the sounds and the lyrical themes are more mythical, mysterious, and spiritual, which makes the listen a bit less heavy in the heart. Next, I have a hip-hop album that I recently re-listened to after not really liking it initially, and I fell in love with this album. It's Open Mike Eagle's Brick Body Kid Still Daydream. It's a concept album of sorts about the housing project that Open Mike Eagle grew up in, and was torn down, and he uses this framework to discuss things like gentrification. Following that, I have a fantastic find in Van Dyke Parks' Clang of the Yankee Reaper. Van Dyke Parks is a fantastic composer of the 20th century who might be most famous for his collaboration with Brian Wilson of the Beach Boys. And Clang of the Yankee Reaper was an album that I found in a Beijing record store, which sold extremely obscure records. And I'd heard of Van Dyke Parks himself, so I thus picked the album up as at a good price. And, you know, featuring calypso sounds, it was like nothing I'd ever heard before, and it's a unique release amongst my other records. But I'm so glad I picked it up because it's such an uplifting and fun record, and I'm so glad I have it in my collection. I also have Pavement's debut album, Slanted and Enchanted. I think this is a 2012 hybrid release, and by hybrid, I mean one side is the original 1991 mastering, and the flip side is a recent remaster, I believe. But it sounds fantastic and really highlights the lo-fi, gritty 1990s indie rock aesthetic that Pavement were embracing. It's certainly less clean than its follow-up Crooked Rain, which in itself isn't a very polished record in terms of sound. Following that, I have the brilliant Pink Floyd's Wish You Were Here. Some consider it their best album, and they've released a number of classics, so it's saying something. And I do consider it my favorite as well. An album and band that I was put onto by my dad. The record in itself stands out as brilliant, featuring the beautiful Wish You Were Here, bookended by Shine On You Crazy Diamond, parts 1 to 7, as well as some truly dystopian tracks like Welcome to the Machine. Next I have Radiohead's Pablo Honey. This is a record just to complete my Radiohead collection, and with that acquisition I do have all their studio albums on vinyl. Many fans like myself consider it to be their worst album, so I do not play the record much, and it's simply there to make up the collection. But it's a formative release featuring the song Creep that, had they not released, they probably would not be in the place they are right now. Following that, I have It Might Be Wrong, Radiohead's 2001 live album, featuring songs off their albums Kid A and Amnesiac. It's a brilliant live album, fantastically recorded with great energy. Some tracks are different to the studio album versions, namely Like Spinning Plates, which doesn't feature the warped and backwards recorded vocals and is heavily piano laden, as well as the song True Love Waits, which doesn't get an album release until 2016. And this version of True Love Waits is with a full band as opposed to the bleak pianos in the version on A Moon-Shaped Pool. Following that, I have Sigur Ros's Agartis Bararian. I'm probably butchering the pronunciation. But this is Icelandic post-rock band, 1999 release that put them onto the world map, and it's a fantastic release. I got the 20th anniversary reissue, and it's pressed fantastically. Following that, I have Paul Simon's Graceland, one of the best pop albums of all time, from Paul Simon of the duo Simon and Garfunkel. This album itself sounds fantastic, with a lot of rhythms and beats inspired by African sounds, and thematically as well. Paul Simon pays homage to the wonders of Africa, and it's a brilliant album that I well and truly love. Next I have my only bootleg record, Sonic Youth's Riot in Melbourne, which is pretty much all the tracks off Daydream Nation, their 1989 record that's considered by most to be Sonic Youth's best album and one of the best rock albums of the 80s and perhaps of all time. I think the songs are recorded off the radio broadcast of the album. It doesn't sound fantastic, but you know, if there's one band you'd go see live, it might just be Sonic Youth. I also have Cat Stevens' Tea for the Tillerman, Pretty straightforward pop album. A person I was introduced to by my dad again, and it's pretty straightforward and simple, but the songs and lyrics are beautiful, easy to digest, but extremely comforting as well. Following that, I have the debut album from one of my favorite current artists, Moses Sumney, Aromanticism, which features all the tracks off the album plus a bonus untitled track at the end of the album's last song. And the album itself is pressed fantastically, and it's a beautiful set of sort of indie rock, guitar based songs that I truly love. Speaking of Moses Sumney, I have his follow-up and my 2020's most anticipated album, Grey, which does remain one of my favorite albums of the year so far. I have the album in the standard black and white pressing, where the first part of the record is in black and the second part's in white. Yeah, it's a fantastic record that I love. Next, I have Tok Tok's Laughing Stock. It's a fantastic, gentle, and atmospheric post-rock album. Following that, I have a live album from the Talking Heads. This is Stop Making Sense, featuring songs off their first 5 albums. Yeah, it's a brilliant live album that I love. Talking Heads are a band that have brilliant studio albums, but their songs are played live brilliantly as well. It's my second favorite of their live albums, behind the name of this band is Talking Heads, their, I think, 82 live album. But I picked this up and I do enjoy it a lot. I also have a Tribe Called Quest's Midnight Marauders, their 3rd album. This is a fan favorite of A Tribe Called Quest, while their previous album, The Low End Theory, is considered by most to be their best album. I enjoy Midnight Marauders almost as much, if not more, and it's a brilliant set of tracks, and it really bops hard on the record player. I also have the self-titled debut from Vampire Weekend, fantastic collection of indie pop tracks that are super fun and lighthearted. Next, one of my favorite bands, Yo La Tengo. I have, well, firstly their album I Can Hear Your Heart Beating, which was my first exposure to them, and it remains one of my favorite records. Super beautiful, featuring noise pop sounds that are atmospheric, but at the very core, very poppy and enjoyable. And then I also have the 2000 Dream Pop album, And Everything Turned Itself Inside Out. And I have the original first pressing, which sounds fantastic. So that rounds off my 12 inches. I've more than 50 additions this year to my collection, buffing up my collection quite a bit. I also have, in terms of 10 inches, this The Kingdom of Limbs of Radiohead, which is my only copy of their 2011 album. It comes in clear vinyl, and I got the second hand, so without the original newspaper insert and the CD, but I only have the stickers and the double 10-inch clear vinyl. But it sounds really good, although it's the worst of the 2 pressings that exist. It's the GZ Media pressing, but it's a fantastic album that I'm really glad I have in my collection. I also have this 12-inch sealed Igor by Tyler, the Creator, a 2019 album that I loved upon release but have liked less and less since. I ordered this limited mint green edition upon its release, and it took 4 to 6 months to send out to me. So I did receive a copy, but I sold it on because I did not enjoy it as much as I initially did. I sold it for the same price I purchased it for, which is probably a bad decision given that I had waited 5 months for it. And somehow out of the blue, they sent me another copy of this. Perhaps because I was messaging them quite a lot and asking for a change of address. So perhaps they clocked me into their database twice. But to atone for my initial mistake, I now have this version, and I've kept it sealed. And it's the only record in my collection that I'm probably keeping just solely for value. But who knows, maybe one day I'll open it up. I still do like the record, don't get me wrong. Lastly, moving on to box sets, I have 2 editions this year. I have a live album by Animal Collective, Ballet Slippers, which commemorates their 10th anniversary of their seminal Merriweather Post-Pavilion album. And if this a live album features many of those tracks, plus tracks from their previous albums. And it's a brilliant collection of live songs. I'm really glad I have this album now in my collection. I also have Kankyo Ongaku, which is a compilation album released by the record label Light in the Attic, featuring songs from the 1980s ambient scene in Japan. And I truly love this album when I listened to it on a streaming service, which features a cut down set of songs. And I knew that, you know, with more of the same, I would truly love this compilation album. It comes in 3 discs and it's beautifully pressed and quiet and some of the best ambient music I've listened to. So I'm glad I have that in the collection. So that rounds off my additions to my record collection. Now I have over 90, dare I say, 100 pieces of vinyl in my collection, which places me in a great position because now I've most of the essential albums that I would like to have in my collection, and now I can move on to adding to my collection with more diverse sounds and from more niche areas. So that rounds up my 2020 update to my record collection.